169 prisoners are being brought for trial to this court in the City of London, the Old Bailey.
Their finding of the Old Bailey car bomb that killed one man and caused 178 casualties.
That I'm enormously grateful to the jury.
Sensational developments from the phone hacking trial.
The judge made his ruling today. Huntly shook and turned pale.
Third IRA suspect to be acquitted of terrorist charges here in a year.
The sentence of the court is one of life imprisonment. Could you please take the defendant against us?
The Old Bailey is the home of British justice. Its walls have formed the theatre to our greatest national dramas. To Oscar Wilde, George Blake and Christine Keeler. To Sutcliffe, Huntley and Warboys, the IRA and Al-Qaeda. Through the rows of metal detectors, up a marble staircase, past statues of long-forgotten judges, in a crowded, wood-panelled back room, all day long, a team of court reporters dart between hearings. They work to file the reports that go out to newspaper offices across the country. No transcripts exist in British courts. They are not televised. Without court reporters, justice is not only blind, it is mute. And there are vanishingly few court reporters left. Court News is the last specialist agency to operate from the Old Bailey. They've been here since 1985. In their vaults lie first-hand accounts of every major case of the age. I'm Gavin Haynes. In this series, we're going to be going inside British trials, through the eyes of those who see justice being done every single day. The Court News team.
Oh, fucking hell, they're not letting Laura in now, guys. No, they're not letting you in.
We're in the back of the Old Bailey, in the press room. It's magnificent and shabby. High, vaulted ceilings, full of mismatched office chairs, often of an exceptional quality, despite the ravages of time. Green leather and dark wood. In the corner, a steel ladder is plastered with a label that reads, "This belongs to the press room. Fuck off." The carpets are thick burgundy but bleached into yellow in parts. There's a pane in a vast wooden sash window in the corner that's completely cracked. The team say they've been asking the building maintenance staff about its repair for 2 or 3 years now.
I'm Scott Wilford, the editor of Central News, also known as Court News UK.
Scott is half of the duo who run Court News UK, also known as the Central News Agency. Him and another man, Guy Toyne, took it over in 1999.
The press room where we work now, it was known as the Thorpe Suite. It was called the Thorpe Suite because of the Jeremy Thorpe case, the Liberal MP who found himself on trial in the late 70s. I think it involved some kind of blackmail and whatnot. But he was consulting his barristers in that room, apparently. It was known as the Thorpe Suite, and it was given over to the press a few years ago when they shut down the old press room in the lower ground room, which was a bit like a bomb shelter. And the press had been moved down into that area in the 70s after the IRA bomb. So they moved us back upstairs where we had some windows with some natural sunlight. So, yeah, can't complain.
What was court reporting like back then or before? I mean, where does the story start for you with court reporting and what's changed since the millennium?
As a trainee, I wandered into the Old Bailey press room in the early 90s. In those days, there was probably about 6, if you could believe this, in the Old Bailey press room, which was down in the bowels of the building. There was probably about 6 micro agencies, little photographic agencies. There was Press Association had 2 people there. Our company, Central, was pretty big then. I think there was probably about 6 reporters, maybe 3 other photo agencies. I think papers like the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun had their own reporter down there. Nothing like that exists anymore.
Today, they're the last proper court reporting agency left in the building. Scott and Guy are often described by the team as chalk and cheese. For his part, Scott is the careful one, an editor's editor, prone to grumbling, deep in the details. Guy is, well, cheese.
Well, I've been fired from various different jobs. I was a journalist working on a entertainment's trade newspaper called Video Trade Weekly, which is now long since defunct, probably because I wasn't working there any longer. I was fired there for being really rude to an industry executive from Metropolitan at a charity go-kart night. So I was basically, how can I say, down at heel somewhat, and I actually first came into the orbit of Central News when I looked at an advert in an old phone directory under news agencies. And I actually, having no job, turned up for an interview. I didn't know that they were a courting agency at the time. And they gave me the job as a reporter. And I worked there basically for several years. I think at that time, it's difficult to explain to people who aren't really interested in this sort of thing. I guess everyone is fascinated by true crime to a certain extent. And obviously what you see at the Old Bailey is weirder and stranger than anything you'll see on the TV or in a cinema or whatever. I was endlessly fascinated by it, and then I ended up working for the company, the original Central News Company, for several years before I could sort of pull myself away and leave the company. And I worked as a crime reporter on a daily newspaper, for a couple of years.
I think Guy Toyne came in, he'd been working as a reporter in the West Country, maybe done other jobs as well, knew a lot more about the job than I did. I was still a bit of a coffee boy who was running out doing the errands, you know. The guy was already senior to me, so he was in there doing the courts while I was still learning.
And what kind of a bloke was he?
He was like a character. He was already someone that maybe an acquired taste. Not everyone got on with Guy. I instantly did get on with him. He was never one to bite his lip and loved to regale people about the cases he was covering. So yeah, I learnt from him just by listening to his ideas of how to report courts and just hanging around with him. He just explained to me the basic art of sitting in a court and getting the best line out.
And then the opportunity came to buy the company from the previous owners. And that was, I think, 1999, which is a long time ago now, but doesn't seem that long ago. And we've been doing it ever since, to be quite honest with you.
And how have you been doing it ever since?
Well, the industry itself has changed absolutely completely over that time. It's a bit sad, really, because we have been just managing a decline. When we started, there was still a very strong regional newspaper industry. There was still a very strong local newspaper industry. And obviously, there are national newspapers with very, very large budgets indeed. And obviously, we tried to sell the court copy, news stories from Central News to all of those people. And we did it quite successfully for a while. We were certainly if you like, our revenue was largely supported by some of the big London local papers for several years. And then as they declined to the level they are now, which in my view, I don't think some of them are really newspapers at all. I don't really know what they are. I guess the agency has correspondingly shrunk in size. I think at one point, we had something like 10 reporters. It was absolutely incredible. 10 reporters and 2 photographers, plus a picture editor. So in a way, I guess you could say that we've done well to stay alive in such difficult circumstances. But we'll keep on trying until the hand of the Grim Reaper settles on the shoulder and lead us away, I guess. We've got nothing else to do.
The Central News Agency, aka Court News, makes its money by going deeper and longer into the court process than anyone else. They produce dense, detailed copy of the sort that can only ever come from being there, from spooling out shorthand as you follow hour after hour of bewigged cross-examination. Sitting in a court, however compelling, is a lonely experience. It requires a certain toleration of boredom. You might easily spend 6 hours and just hear a list of facts about the location of mobile phone masts. That's why few bother. In an internet age, it's easier to hire copy monkeys, to pirate someone else's story, just report up the headlines. For most media organisations, it's not worth the slog. But the only place to really find out about crime and justice as it is now is to sit in those courts. That's why court news is special. So often, they're the only people up in that press gallery.
All that's kind of drained away. I mean, the local newspaper market's collapsed in terms of, knowing what people from their locality are doing in the courts or from local politics. I think all this has fallen away, which is it's a real danger because it's just a process of democracy.
Today, I've come to ask Scott and Guy about a case that seemed to miss the media cycle. It's one that concluded only a few months ago, but it's a story with a long genesis in the system and more than one false ending. Tell me about Anthony Constantino.
Well, Anthony Constantino became known as the real Wolf of Wall Street. Now, he basically pulled off this massive £70 million Ponzi streak where he ripped off people in investments.
He's an interesting character, perhaps one of those great dinosaurs of the city. When he's described as a sort of Wolf of Wall Street character, I think in this case, obviously that term has been used again and again and again, but I think in this case it was quite apposite. He did behave in that particularly boorish, aggressive way where he considered that basically it was his empire, he could behave in any way he wanted to do. So in terms of the character, we've seen people like him before. These boiler rooms that people set up where they have, you can imagine him goading the salesman to rip off more and more people. These sort of frauds are not uncommon.
Anthony Constantino was operating yards from where we're now sat, 5 blocks up, at Heron Tower. 40 floors high, Heron Tower is one of the City of London's most prestigious business addresses, casting a long afternoon shadow over Liverpool Street Station. At the time, Constantino was still in his early 30s. Over just a couple of years, £70 million of other people's money flowed into his bank account. Because of this feat of deception, and just as much because of the way he spent that money, some have dubbed him the Wolf of Bond Street, or even the Wolf of Liverpool Street. Others haven't been so kind. I mean, is that a common fraud? Is that the sort of thing that you see a lot of?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the bigger ones. I think all these cases that are being heard at Southwark Crown Court for the last 2 decades or so, probably half the courts there are given up to this kind of fraud. I think they run in a myriad ways. I think they're cold calling investment scams.
Constantino seems to have inspired a manic devotion in most of his staff. He staged wild parties for his employees, sushi platters, endless champagne, and the various chemical pick-me-ups of city boy life. As the court would later hear, he often drank vodka throughout the working day. And in 2016, he was prosecuted for a range of sexual assaults in the workplace. Some of these charges stemmed from a moment at one of these legendary company parties, when he force-fed a female employee burning hot wasabi. While his fraud trial had only wrapped up this summer, it had taken an awfully long time to get before a judge. Its origins lay as far back as 2014. No one who had covered that end of the case was still working for Court News, so Scott told me I should speak to the City of London Police. Soon enough, they'd invited me up to their headquarters, another block over from the Old Bailey, at Guildhall.
My name is Simon Cordell. My title now is Police Staff Investigator, but I'm a retired Detective Constable of City of London Police.
Simon Cordell had a kind of younger Alan Sugar look to him. Slick back, salt and pepper hair, neat 5 o'clock shadow, gold chain discreetly tucked into his light blue shirt. Simon had been working on the case for 8 years, so long in fact that he'd retired halfway through. But he'd come out of retirement to get his man. I mean, you've spent a lot of time pursuing him one way or another. What kind of a person was he to you?
I probably never really met the true Anthony Constantino. I mean, when we had any personal dealings, he was pleasant enough. He didn't sort of give too much away. But my understanding is in the workplace, he could be a bit of a tyrant. He could be a bit of a bully. He could shout and bawl at people in the middle of a busy office and not think twice about threatening the sack. It was his way or no way. There was very little negotiation with him, and certainly some of the witnesses in the case said that, you know, if he didn't like what he was hearing, he'd walk out of meetings. He'd often be drunk in the office. You hear all of that and you think, why were people parting with their money? So there must have been a sort of a clever man behind it that could say the right things at the right time. The investors probably didn't see the side of him that I've just described. And also, I would say that it's all financial. You know, if you are, on the face of it, a very generous and rewarding person, that buys favour. And I think, sadly, the workforce and also some of the investors were led by the financial returns and not perhaps the personality of the man himself.
How does a man like that get started in that game? I mean, he had offices in Heron Towers.
He's probably had to put some of his own money in to begin with. He's moved offices as well, so he's worked his way from a sort of, perhaps not quite a sort of prestigious office to begin with, as capital starts coming in and the personal recommendations, sort of private invitations, sort of domino effect that kicks in. I'm sure that one of the first things he did with the money was secure a prestigious office, Heron Tower. It adds to the illusion that it's a successful business.
Somewhere in the background, Constantino had some money of his own, but he also had another head start when it came to projecting his mirage, his ancestry. His father was a man called Aristos Constantinou. Aristos was a fashion magnate, a Cypriot incomer who'd ended up in London in the swinging 60s. Aristos had started out in the Carnaby Street rag trade, making cocktail gowns and casino wear. Later, he expanded to Duke Street, then Oxford Street, and then ever upwards. From Marylebone, his business grew out to Chicago, and from thence to Lausanne. His boutique Ariella chain still exists to this day. For Mr. and Mrs. Constantino, for a while, life seemed perfect. They lived on the Bishop's Avenue, London's most exclusive street, a ribbon of vast mansions in Highgate, often called the Billionaire's Row, until, in the early hours of New Year's Day, 1985, still only 40 years old, Aristos and his wife were coming back from a New Year's Eve party.
Today's ceremony at St Mary's Greek Orthodox Church was attended by hundreds of mourners. The grief of Mr. Constantinou's mother, his wife Elena, and his close-knit family was obvious. Plainclothes CID men were present among those in the church, looking for anyone or anything that might help them solve the mystery surrounding his murder. Elena Constantinou had brought a single red rose from her and one from each of her 3 children to drop into the grave.
Aristos was shot dead with 6 bullets, silver bullets. A fashion tycoon slain in a hit job on London's most exclusive address. Inevitably, the case became known in the tabloids as the Silver Bullets murder. For a while, Aristos' wife, Elena, was a suspect. She had been a 17-year-old shop girl blessed with Audrey Hepburn looks when Aristos had swept her out of his business and into his life. But by the time they set off for the party, their marriage had become sour and tetchy. Apparently, Elena had been having an affair with another of Aristos' shop managers. Achilles, Aristos' brother and business partner, has always believed that he was planning to divorce her. The case was never solved. In fact, it remains one of the Met's great white whales, and, accordingly, it's gone down in London criminal history. Often, when some shard of fresh evidence comes to light, it's dredged up all over again by the papers. Often, Elena is put back in the frame. In 1997, she appears to have narrowly avoided prosecution. Father dead, mother a suspect. I wondered if Simon Cordell had any idea what that might have done to a young Anthony.
You know, I can't imagine what it must be like to be 3 years old and your father gets shot dead. And he obviously idolised his father, and you can see that he there was expenditure on anniversaries of his father's death and stuff that we see is some of the money that's spent. So he obviously looked up to his father, and yeah, it must be difficult for him.
Later, he would take on his father's mantle in more practical ways, letting potential investors assume he was the scion of that fashion dynasty.
which again we would say is not true. We would say that that was basically a company that was continued by his late father's brother, so his uncle. And we saw no evidence that he suddenly inherited this huge fortune. So you could argue that that was in poor taste if he was using that as part of his backstory, if you like, to investors, which he certainly did.
It sounds like there is a sort of a social, psychological archetype of these kind of guys. You know, I mean, he seems like he was too clever by precisely half, and in the end it was always going to catch up with him. But there's a kind of an arrogance under there. I mean, that's the thing that you see time and again?
I think there is. I think, first of all, they have no conscience, so they don't worry at all, whereas you and I would worry about owing someone £1 for their sandwich. These people will... I mean, his argument was he was doing this to share his wealth with others. You know, it was almost the complete opposite.
Inside the business, Constantino had hired a bunch of fake city types. These were often fresh out of college. They'd often failed to get into finance by more legitimate means. And so, for them, this was their last best shot. After the crypto exchange FTX exploded last year, we learned of how its CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, tended to place easily malleable souls around him. People who wouldn't ask too many questions. Constantino used the same trick. He employed third stringers, the wannabes, and shoved them into the C-suite. Take Sarah Tien, for example, the company's chief financial officer. She studied at the lowly University of Loughborough. Her only previous role of any significance was a 1-year placement at PricewaterhouseCoopers in something called the International Assignment Service. A director of the business, the 31-year-old South African Craig Drosty, was a former yacht captain, or at least he was a former relief yacht captain. There's no evidence he ever made the jump to full-time captaincy. Day to day, it's easy enough to believe that some of these people had no idea what was going on up the chain. As Simon Cordell pointed out, fraudsters will often deliberately silo their employees as much as their victims. They make sure that no one has all of the pieces of the puzzle. There were traders who traded and salesmen who sold. It's just that these bits of the operation lost money. Neither was driving the business forward.
Yeah, I think they were all probably people that had very limited sort of trading experience. And for them, it was a perfect opportunity to suddenly have this lucrative sort of position in the city. The wages were probably more generous than, say, other companies. And they probably saw it as a fantastic sort of opportunity for them, and almost admitted themselves that they had so much to learn. You know, there was a lot of comments. It was almost run like a cult. I mean, when you saw some of the phone sort of communications, Mr. Constantino would on a daily basis say how great he was, and everyone by return said how great he was and how much they, you know, and there was people saying, you know, they'd almost sort of like didn't want to have holiday because they enjoyed working for him so much and they learned so much from him, and it all fed into his ego and the sort of type of man he was, and they obviously were happy to play that role because, again, coming back to the basics of financial returns, they were getting paid well for doing what he asked of them.
His company, CWM, Capital World Markets, was ostensibly a foreign exchange trading firm. At one point, they broadcast their own daily market reports on YouTube, starring the boat captain, Craig Drosty.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the CWMFX Market Reports, coming to you directly from the Heron Tower, today the 6th of November 2014.
The company operated a customer support for people trading their own funds, what's called retail trading. So they have a small trading account, it's on a platform, and the suspect company was almost providing a customer service.
Next, CWM branched into trading seminars. Lowly salesfolk would reach out to their contacts, many of them already people on the platform. Do you want to know how to trade better, they'd ask? How to get good at it? Trade like the pros. Come along. No obligation. The first seminars were often free or delivered at a knockdown price. That built trust. It got people into the marketing funnel. And as the relationship built, you'd gradually be asked to put some of your money into an actively managed account, where, instead of you trading, CWM will be trading on your behalf. And soon enough, you'd be introduced to a more senior account manager. These guys wanted to know a lot more about you. They wanted to feel you out. What were your financial dreams? What did you actually want from life? If they felt they had the measure of you, in short order you'd be taken behind the curtain and offered a unique opportunity. Had you heard, they'd whisper, about the special fund? 5% returns a month, risk-free. That's right, 5% a month, not a year. So 60% a year, in fact. In 2 years, you'd more than double your money. But the thing about the special fund was, you had to go big. This wasn't one for your mom and pop investors. You had to prove to them that you were a player, someone who was serious about securing their financial future. Minimum spend? £50,000. Of course, if you didn't have that sort of money, if you weren't a serious player, you could always walk away.
Once that's got up and running, it just spread like wildfire. I mean, it's incredible. There was introducers around the country, all sort of selling this product. So we had investors around the country all signing up to the product. And once people were getting their returns and thinking that that was a sign that the investment was genuine, you obviously had other friends and family, the old FOMO effect of fear of missing out, thinking, cripes, that seems too good to be true, but they're getting their money back. So friends and family, and you can see with some of the victims that it's caused a massive split with people that now are sort of almost blaming the first person that encouraged them to invest as the reason why they've lost as well, because it was their personal recommendation. And none of these people are sophisticated investors, or very few, even though it was a massive minimum entry level. These people were literally investing their life savings and retirement sort of pots to try and make a passive income. So it is sadly left a lot of people in a very bad place.
The wealth that now poured in through the front door of Heron Towers drained away just as quickly into Anthony Constantino's narcissistic upkeep. One fascinating nugget to come out of the earliest phase of his success was that he'd gone back to his childhood. He too now had a house on the Bishop's Avenue. Except, after 30 years, even billionaires were finding it a bit tight. The house was costing him £50,000 a month just to rent, £600,000 a year. Having begun softly, shading the difference between legitimate and illegitimate, as the scheme expands, more and more names go on the list. Soon enough, the network effect means they no longer need all of that hard sell. But Constantino still isn't satisfied. Rather than hang on to the last shreds of caution, now he sees an opportunity to gouge even more, even faster. He doubles the entry point to the special fund, from 50,000 to 100,000.
Mr. Constantinou makes a flippant comment to one person who's trying to pay less, I think 80,000, almost dismissive of sort of saying, I don't need your money. I've got all these huge investors and you're just small fry. So almost sort of belittling this person that then goes away and gets other family members to top up the sum to make it sort of up to the level required. But yeah, I think on the whole it's £100,000, and there's obviously some that have invested a lot more. There's a few on record that have invested six figures, £1 million plus. One chap sold a care home business, invested all of that as his sort of retirement plan, and he's lost a lot.
Another woman had cancer. She got an insurance payout of around £250,000. But rather than pay off her mother's mortgage, as she'd initially wanted to with the money, she was encouraged to stick it all into the scheme. Word of mouth travels erratically. That means that the special fund could find itself taking over whole communities. For instance, the Gurkhas took a bad hit. Gurkhas are Nepalese soldiers who'd served in their own unique regiment in the British Army. Many of them had been granted the right to settle in England. Most of those that did lived in the military town of Aldershot. In a small, tight-knit community like that, news of sudden windfalls spreads fast. By rights, those kinds of big returns should generate big suspicions, but the critics could hardly get going. Constantino saw to it that they were ruthlessly crushed. A few sceptical souls did ask questions in a forum called Trade to Win. There, A poster called Delta Trader 12 wrote, "I worked at CWM as an employee for literally a couple of days and resigned in disgust after I witnessed the misrepresentation, misleading statements, and high-pressure sales tactics." Another poster on the thread spoke about how CWM was soliciting for asset management business outside of their license. They mentioned the off-the-record fund, but the company was actively monitoring dissent. They took the classic libel route, using expensive lawyers to jet off terse letters, shooting down anyone who speculated about the true nature of their business. Trade to Win took the safe option. Within days, both the original post and its response had been deleted.
The website's concern just took the safe option and removed those entries.
For a while, Constantino could live the life he somehow imagined he deserved. Every miserable, unimaginative cliché of it. He spent £70,000 on his baby's first birthday.
The goodie bags that the kids turned up and got must have been incredible. But yeah, I mean, that's extravagant to say the least for a child that's not even going to know what's going on. I think the most obvious one, which obviously was handled by what I would class as a sort of top level party organiser based in Knightsbridge, who probably only deal in the rich and famous clients. They oversaw his wedding in Santorini, which was a staggering £2.3 million. All of it paid for from investors' funds. There was not a suggestion that he'd funded any of it himself. You can see the payments come from the accounts where the investor funds go in. And it was borderline ridiculous. His request included having a whole wedding venue built from scratch on a disused tomato plant. All his guests were flown in private jets, all put up in 5-star hotels, top of the range food, champagne. There was even sort of celebrity singers from Greece that were booked to perform. The event then had to get moved because the weather was dubious on the day of the event. And so he basically sanctioned it all getting moved at another cost. So, you know, I mean, £2.3 million, when you know it's not your money, is showing absolutely no consideration for what he's, you know, up to, really. What people have to remember is with a Ponzi fraud, a lot of the money's been burnt as the fraud continues. So I think on the stats, 40% of the money that goes in goes back out again as returns and commissions. So half the pot's nearly gone anyway. And if there's no genuine income coming in at the sort of back end, that money's just sort of hemorrhaging out. So you've got to factor in the fact that all the returns going out, all the costs of the business, because it's, as we've discussed with the rent, the staffing costs, the computer, the IT, you know, all of that in a city, huge sums. Don't even get me started on sponsorship deals, which we might come on to. Millions of pounds wasted on that.
Some of the rest of the money was reinvested in laundering the brand. Chelsea Football Club made CWM their official foreign exchange partner. The company sponsored its own MotoGP team, LCR Honda, and Constantino spent nearly £500,000 on private jets for him and his entourage to follow them around Europe. CWM even became the title sponsors of the London Boat Show.
At the CWMFX London Boat Show, we wanted to create some new experiences which fitted in with a new theme, and we needed to do something different, totally unlike anything that's been seen at boat shows before. And it's created a real stir. That emotional stir has been fantastic, it really has.
There are some incredible pictures online of Constantino meeting Princess Anne, who was the event patron.
So sadly, when we went through the doors in March 2015, there was very little left of the 70 million that we think has been lost in this case.
So take me back to the first moment that Constantino flickers onto the City of London police radar. Like, when do the dials start moving?
When we had a whistleblower. With a case like this, it's not obvious that there's a fraud. You know, it takes some of the victims, it takes some convincing that there's a fraud. They're getting their returns, what they're seeing all seems presentable. They obviously ask the questions and get the right answers back. But someone working within the company had their concerns and raised those concerns to us. bearing in mind you've got a big, on the face of it, bold company sitting in Heron Tower with all these fancy sponsorship deals and workforce, we have to sort of manage the risk element of what we do next, because obviously we could be sued if we close a successful ongoing operation down without good reason. So a whistleblower comes forward, we have to scope it and scope it quick. Behind the sort of company itself, you look at some of the basics and it starts to raise alarm bells. The company only incorporated in October 13. So this company has grown massively in 18 months. Well, less than 18 months at that point. That's very fast. You look at the workforce, we did checks on all the workforce, none of them have got a financial background. That's strange. You look at Mr. Constantinou, the previous trading company he worked for had an FCA alert against them. So again, and you look at the numbers and you think none of this quite makes sense, how all of a sudden it's so successful sponsoring all these big sporting events, coupled with the whistleblowers. So then you move on and you go and approach a couple of investors to get the sort of facts behind the investment model, and obviously we did that. There's always a risk they could compromise your investigation. Thankfully they didn't, and I think that was enough for us, and we got warrants and went through the doors in March, which was 2-3 months after the sort of first report to us. So
you very much go through the doors. I'm imagining a kind of a scrum of policemen moving through a building.
We did. I mean, the operation was huge. We did the offices, we did the home addresses of all the workforce that we identified. We arrested, I think on the day, 13 key nominals that we'd identified. They were all taken to different stations, they were all interviewed. And I think we did catch them with their pants down, I'll be honest. There was stuff on the computer screens whilst we were doing the search that were clearly showing things that weren't right. Obviously the digital reviews that followed, we found some very damning evidence. They hadn't had chance to clear the deck, shall we say. And obviously I think that proved in the fact that the defendant, by his own admission, accepted there was a fraud at trial.
So you arrested 13 people on the day. How many of those people were ultimately prosecuted?
Sadly, only one. But I mean, to be fair, I say 13. In effect, we interviewed 59 suspects over the duration of the 5 years it was investigated. So we started with the main guys on the day. We then interviewed what I would class as a second tier of staff. We interviewed some of the introducers, 59 people in total. We then sought charging advice, I think, on 12. So there was 12 that we put forward to CPS. And I think it's fair to say Mr. Constantinou was the man running everything from the top, and everyone else had their role, but it was probably in silo of everyone else's role. And did they all know what he was ultimately doing? Probably not.
It seems to me that he probably didn't act alone.
Well, he couldn't act alone. And I think if you're a clever fraudster, you get everyone else to do the sort of donkey work for you. But clearly, if you're selling a product and that product has been explained to you by Mr. Constantinou, that person's argument is going to be, well, I was only selling what I was told. And Mr. Constantinou ultimately controlled all the purse strings. You know, he had control over all the bank accounts. So everyone had their role, but no one quite knew the full picture as opposed to him. So, and he did try and blame other people at trial. He tried to blame the two people below him. And that was effectively his defence, was they were doing the crime without his knowledge. But the financials just didn't support that argument. You know, he was the one making the obviously the huge returns, the personal sort of expenditure, all the VIP sort of trappings of the lifestyle. I don't think you could sort of see that was going on for anyone. And you could sort of see in the communications that they all worship the ground he stood on and answer to him. He was the man in charge, for sure.
I mean, people like me and the public, we read of these things, and there's almost sort of a titillation in the man with his 3 Bentleys and his £600,000 a year rental house on the Bishop's Avenue. But you've had to trawl through all of this line by line, and you've met the victims. I mean, what do you think when you sort of see all these expense receipts for his extravagant lifestyle?
I mean, it's the complete opposite of me as a person, because I'm just so unmaterialistic, it's untrue. And so I find, you know, all of the frauds that you deal with, they've all got pictures of Rolex watches and gold-plated Ferraris on their desk, almost as an inspiration of what's important in life. And yet, sadly, I understand everyone needs money to survive and stuff, but when you want to be rich and powerful just to sort of make you a better person, it sort of adds further motivation and inspiration to me to do my job properly, because you just know that they just are doing it with the complete callousness of knowing that they're destroying obviously all the innocent people that are handing over their money to him. And he, you know, even when it came to the sort of the post-police raids, he's still promising to pay everyone their money back. He knows that he spent the money, he knows that it's gone, and he's still alluding to the fact that it's all still safely there and it's only the police that's stopping them getting it back. So not only is he taking their money and spent it, he's then just lying to them a second time round. You can't make it personal, but fraud people sadly have the worst human characteristics that you could come across.
Tell me about your own life in the fraud squad.
So I've been doing fraud 20 years now, so I'm probably, sadly, either very old or probably one of the longest serving fraud detectives here. I love fraud. I think when you become a detective, and don't get me wrong, I worked in CID before I joined fraud, so I transferred in. And I'd worked on murders, rapes, serious crime. And I transferred to fraud, and everyone was saying to me, you're going to find it really boring, you're going to find it really slow. But actually, I think I've slightly got OCD anyway, and there's nothing more rewarding than sitting in court in a trial where you've slaved over a case for 3-4 years or however long it's taken, and you then see top counsel in either the Old Bailey or Southwark fighting over all your evidence and preparation. And if you get the reward and justice for the victims, it's the pinnacle of what being a detective is all about.
I mean, where does this rank in terms of the cases that you've covered?
I think it's been the hardest, I'm not going to lie. I think he's obviously, it's been a very tough sort of process to trial, and it's obviously had its ups and downs. You know, every case is different, but yeah, I think given the fact I came back and it could have gone horribly wrong. I could have gone back, and if the case had not gone well, I would have thought I could have walked away, retired, and it would have been someone else's sort of watch that it sort of didn't go well on. So there was a lot riding on it, I think, for me personally. The fact it's gone okay, apart from sort of him absconding, yeah, I suppose it's a nice closure for me. I've now, I'm not going to lie, I've handed my notice in. I came back purely to see this case through, and now this case is through and the confiscation's sort of underway. I'm going to call time on it, and that is me sort of done. So it's quite sort of poignant for me as well.
I'd liked Simon a lot. He was a dedicated toiler, now long overdue his post-police life. But there was one thing in what he'd said that had felt especially poignant.
The fact it's gone okay, apart from sort of him absconding.
Apart from him absconding. The trial had taken 8 weeks. It had taken Simon and his team 7 years on and off to prepare it. But at the start, Constantino had been granted bail of £100,000. Basic precautions had been taken. He'd been made to wear an electronic tag, his passport had been seized, and initially, of course, he turned up every day to sit in the dock. Until, one day, in the 3rd week, he didn't. Here, the City of London police weren't too keen to talk about the details of how and why. They worried it might give too much succour to others in a similar situation. It seemed tragic, pathetic, terrible that after all that, he'd just sawn off his tag and done a moonlight flit. So I went back to see Scott to get his thoughts.
And then obviously eyebrows raised because he was on bail, despite his history. City of London Police put out an appeal for him with a picture, and he's still on the run. And he's obviously very well connected, extremely wealthy man. Police are still looking for him. But I think, yeah, someone's made a pretty grievous error bailing him in the first place.
He applied for bail, as far as I'm aware, during the trial. One can only imagine the reaction of the good people of City of London Police if they were sitting at the back of the court when he was granted bail. Because when we have bail applications, a judge will often take into consideration whether or not the person has connections with foreign countries which would make it easier for them to abscond to a foreign country. And in this case, I think the clue was the name, Constantinou, and it was obvious, surely, that as soon as he was granted bail, Constantinou was going to vanish. He had plenty of money, he had connections with a foreign country, he wasn't going to stick around.
In Constantinou's absence, the Crown Prosecution Service had to put in a special motion for the trial to be continued. They did, they won, and he was convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. If and when he's ever recovered, he'll be sentenced to extra time for absconding. For now, at least, he has a bonus ball in the lottery of life. Or rather, he has yet another bonus ball, because in June he was stopped at the Bulgarian-Turkish border, travelling on a fake Spanish passport. And for a moment, Simon and the City of London Police celebrated. But then, more news came in. He'd been let go. The exact circumstances around this event are still unclear.
Personally, I don't think they'll ever find him. I really don't. I hope that I'm proved wrong. I hope as well, for the sake of some of those officers from City of London Police, that I am proved wrong and he is found and brought back here. But somehow I doubt it.
There's an incident at the Bulgarian-Turkish border where he is briefly held and then somehow let go.
Well, I can't imagine what would have happened there. I think basically quick phone call from solicitor, offer of, how can I say, £200,000 in pesos or whatever. I think money's changed hands myself. It's more than likely. A quick search on the internet would have revealed how wanted this bloke is. So something dodgy's happened. But there you go.
What do you think drives a guy like that?
Money. These people, they're not really. When you hear Nat King Cole singing "Love Is the Thing," I think these people, I think that message is somewhat lost upon them. They only see life in terms of material gain. Where they live, how much their house is worth, how many cars they drive, how much money they threw over the casino, what top restaurants they go to, all this sort of thing. It's just everything is seen in terms of cash and nothing else. He's just a thoroughly nasty character and also quite grossly overweight as well.
Fresh from the Old Bailey is produced by me, Gavin Haynes, in partnership with Court News UK. Sound mix by Jonathan Webb. You can follow us on Twitter. Court News also has an excellent weekly Substack with the podcast Killers of the Old Bailey, featuring Britain's most experienced murder case reporter, Granwell Gray. The British legal system makes it hard to contact those involved, so if you have personal knowledge of aspects of the Constantinou case, or other cases we've covered, contact us through our Gmail, freshfromtheoldbailey@gmail.com. Discretion assured.